Hi everybody, this is Matthew Poes of Poes Acoustics, and I'm answering questions. All right, so interesting enough, this is tied to the video where I did the review of the ZV-E1 from Sony. Hi Matt, would you be able to follow up on your earlier video about reference level calibration for home theater? Just wondering if you had any new information about how movies are mixed for the home and or best practices for recreating artist's intent. Specifically, does reference level even exist in home theater? What are the headroom requirements? And what kind of room curve best recreates the artist's mixing environment? In one of your earlier videos, you mentioned that an industry insider told you that something closer to the X curve, but with subs elevated 1 dB, is an appropriate target for recreating artist's intent in home theater, which I found interesting. Any insights would be appreciated. Thanks. I enjoy your channel very much. And that was from Michael Slaughter, who I believe has been a follower for quite a long time. All right, so it's funny because I'm having a conversation, like literally on my phone right now next to me with a friend of mine, Ben Goff, about this issue. Here's what I would say. I have learned quite a bit, and I have talked to a bunch of industry insiders about this. I think we need to separate what the industry is doing from what the industry should be doing. And I understand that a lot of you who are watching this probably would assume that what the industry does is a best practice and is the right thing to do. But Ben has indicated he's of the mind, and I don't disagree with him. I actually agree with him on this, that what they're doing, it's not that it's wrong, but it's wrong for us, and there are other ways they could have done what they're doing, which have created some problems for us. And so for us to follow that practice is arguably problematic because it may not be what's right for getting the best experience. So let's start with, is there reference level? When I have talked to numerous experts, I would say there is disagreement on whether they have a listening level that they would want you to listen at. Some people who have been involved in this, some of them are very senior and have been around they were like the godfather of this industry kind of a thing, have said that they do in fact have a listening level that they would expect you to listen at, and that they had reduced it from the 85 dB because they believed that after some time, they had come to realize that that was too loud, that it was actually perceived louder than 85 dB in small residential rooms, and so it needed to be lower. And so they came up with a set of numbers that I don't remember the exact number, but somewhere between, let's say, 72 and 82 dB, that depending on the size of the room, you would monitor at a lower level and then listen at that lower level. A lot of other people, though, that I talked to who are more like the ones doing it right now, they had a different perspective, which was to say they have no ability to control at what volume level you listen at, that there is no standards that have been put in place to allow them to even make a suggestion to you, that they have no way of telling you what the level that they're monitoring at is, and it does vary at every studio. And as a result, you can listen at whatever volume level you want. Having said that, nobody is monitoring residential mixes, the near field mixes, at 85 dB. So what we found out is, as of today, at least anything major, there always could be some weird indie group or something that's doing it differently, but of any of the major studios, everybody is going to be at 82 dB max, like that would be the highest that anybody would be monitoring at, and possibly as low as 72. I believe what I heard is that Sony has a standard for like kids movies and stuff like that to be monitored at 72 dB. Now, you also asked an interesting question, which was how much headroom do you need, 18 or 20 dB? Well, in the original cinema standard, 20 dB would have been the headroom. It's the max that the digital signal would have allowed. However, they've been pushing to cut about 2 dB of digital headroom out of these consumer tracks, meaning there isn't 20 dB of headroom there. There's only really 18 dB of headroom. And so you do have less dynamic range. You could argue that what you'd really get in a room, if listened to the way they're monitoring it, would actually be, let's say at the lowest end of the scale, 72. And then if we add 18 to that, what does that take us to? 90 dB. So that's the loudest that you would have as peaks. And I don't mean 90 dB like continuous either. That would be the peaks, the digital peaks that you would get would be 90 dB. So that's way below the 105 dB that we've talked about, right? The issue is, would you really be impressed sitting in a room watching some major film. I always use Top Gun because it's the only thing I can think of. It's not even like a recent one anymore, but let's just take Top Gun because I can't think of something better. How about Gladiator 2? Because it's in the theaters right now. It's not supposed to be a great movie. I'd like to see it before I judge. I've heard it's not great. I've heard the visual effects are good and the sound effects are good. The movie itself is not great. There was some concern that the casting wasn't maybe right, things like that. For those who don't know, let me just I'm going to get off topic for a second. There is something called HDR by Barco. Gladiator 2 is currently in the theater being played back on these new special projectors from Barco. Now, it's not if you see that movie, it doesn't mean you saw this. You have to go to HDR by Barco's website where it'll give you the ability to purchase tickets and find out where these theaters are. There's a very small number of them. They're only in major cities. But if you happen to live in like New York City, LA, Miami, and there are numerous others, so I don't remember the others, but look them up. If you have the choice, you should go check out Gladiator 2 because what they're using is a new Barco projector that uses light steering, and it allows 300 nit highlights. So it would be the only projector, I mean, even beyond Dolby's current new, so Dolby's projector, which uses the Eclipse as the basis for it, their HDR projector is going to have, from my understanding, probably much better blacks and better contrast, but it's only capable of 108 nits right now. There is a future version coming that I think is probably going to be able to do 300 nits. I don't know that, but I'm speculating, but I think that's going to be the case because that's the new DCI standard. But the Barco, as I understand it, can do that, and it's out now just in these select theaters. It's sort of a trial run. So if you guys are into this, you should go check that out. It's pretty cool. Now, back to home theaters. Take Gladiator 2. If you played back Gladiator 2 in your theater for yourself and your friends, let's say, who are into this, and you did it at 72 dB as your like reference level and 90 dB as your peaks, and your room was like mine or bigger, would that really be impressive? Ben argues no. I agree with Ben. I don't think that would be impressive. I think that would be a pretty dull movie experience. Now, we tend to boost the bass over, this is the other question you asked, we tend to boost the bass more than is correct for what's being done in the studios. And that would change our perception a little bit, but I still don't think that would be, it wouldn't shake the room, it wouldn't have realism to it, it just wouldn't be dynamic enough. But if you turn it up to 85 dB, you've got a different problem. When they were mixing the movie at 72 dB, and they didn't, I'm actually pretty sure they probably didn't mix that movie at 72, but again, for the home mix that you would get access to, it's not going to be 85 either. It's probably going to be 78 would be my guess. That's, a lot of studios are using that number. So if you played it back though at 85 dB, the problem you would have is that when they switched over to do the near field mix, they would have remixed the Atmos speakers, the top speakers, I should say, it's the correct term, the side surrounds and back surrounds, those all would have been subjectively remixed to give the same perception of relative loudness, which means they would have been turned up. So if you turn it up to 85 dB, all the surround effects would be way too loud. And the other thing that would be problematic is the voices. So the voice level would have been changed up higher on average, because otherwise it would have been too quiet if they had left it the way it was. And it's a more dynamically constrained format when they switch to the residential mix too. So by doing that, they've essentially made the whole thing louder, like louder as in like you've heard of the digital loudness wars kind of idea where music became compressed and louder, that was shifted up. Same basic thing is kind of happening here. And so what I would argue is that listening at 85 dB would be more impressive, but it probably is going to be perceived as too loud. And it wouldn't be correct, technically, because they've remixed the whole thing in a way that's corrupted the soundtrack. If you're watching on your tablet or your phone or over headphones, if you're watching on a soundbar or your TV, it's all fine. Like, all of this doesn't matter. And that's why they probably did this. That and the idea that 85 dB in a cinema room doesn't sound the same as 85 dB in a room like this. But the thing is, probably the differences aren't as extreme as we've made them out to be. Probably 85 dB, there aren't studies on this. The person who did it, who I have a lot of respect for, but the person who did it, I think did it as an internal company study. I would love to see some more independent studies done rigorously and then published in like AES or something like that, so that it's something we could cite. I mean, that's one of the problems is we can't cite anything other than a standard. But it wouldn't shock me if in the rooms that we're typically doing, which are usually larger, they're often like somewhere between 6 and 10 meters long, or for sake of argument, like 18, 19 feet to like maybe 30, 35 feet long, in that kind of a range is like true for high-end home theaters. Width-wise, we're often looking at somewhere between maybe 5 and 7 or 8 meters wide, kind of a thing. And for height, 3+ meters tall. I mean, I just did one recently. It was 5 meters tall, has like really high ceilings. I think it's like, I don't remember what 5 meters actually equals to in feet, but like 16 feet, something like that. So those are not like cinema. They're nowhere near the size of a commercial cinema. Those are big rooms, right? I mean, I don't know that it's correct to say that you should be listening at 72 or 78 or even 82 dB. Maybe 82 dB. I actually think that might have been that might be closer to the right number. So I think the answer to your question is no, we don't have as much headroom as you do in commercial cinema. It's going to be 18 dB pretty much in every case. For new content, this is only true of Atmos and beyond, because before that there was a little bit, you might actually get a cinema mix in a residential system. After Atmos came out, that's not true anymore because they changed the workflow. So it's going to be 18 dB pretty much every time. Then you've got like, what's the right listening level? Well, you can listen whatever level you want. Whatever sounds good to you is the level you should listen at. If you want to listen at the level it was mastered at, there isn't a single number. The best way to figure that out would be to try to look up the different studios and find out if they list anything that explains what levels they tend to master to. You could also ask, but what I found was that it really depends. And again, even within a given studio, there seems to be different levels that are used for different movie types. So kids' movies seem to be done, I think Sony said 72 dB. But I believe that Sony does 78 dB for like action movies and stuff like, and dramas and things like that. I believe that like Fox and those are doing this something similar. I don't know what they do for kids' movies. I could ask, I have some contacts there. I could ask and see if anybody could tell me what the kids' movies are, but I believe that everything else is 78 dB. Might be 82 for like Star Wars or something. I've got a friend there who probably could give me an answer on that one. Okay, so then we've got the room curve. So they're using basically a flat curve. Dolby had introduced a curve that has like 1 dB more in the bass, and I think that tends to be done often in the near field rooms as well, as they tend to put about 1, maybe 2 dB of boost in the bass below 80 hertz, but that's it. It's never 3 or 6 or 9 or 12, nothing like we do in residential stuff. It's basically flat in the bass. In the high frequencies, it rolls off, and probably way too much. And a lot of people have argued, and I would absolutely 100% agree with this, that the X curve was a mistake from day one. It was either misunderstood by the people that implemented it, or it was misunderstood by everybody afterwards, but implemented correctly. So as has been said, you take a speaker with a flat frequency response and 60 degrees, I'm sorry, excuse me. There we go. 60 degrees of directivity. So like the half angle out 30 degrees to either side. Take a speaker like that, and you will find that it will follow the X curve, basically, when stuck in a really large auditorium type room, like where commercial cinemas are played back. Stick that same system in a small room like this, it won't be anywhere near as rolled off. Here's the much bigger point. That's not a target. That's what the speaker naturally does. You shouldn't be adjusting it to force it to behave that way. The speaker should behave as it behaves. So the application of a high frequency reduction intentionally like that, shelving down the high frequencies, doesn't really make any sense, and it shouldn't have ever been done. But studios are, in fact, doing something quite a bit like that. So arguably, you should be listening, if you want to follow what they're doing, to something like that. Having said that, when you ask them what they think you should do, their answer is still going to be the same as the listening levels. There is no standard. There is nothing to force you to do anything. And ultimately, it's for your enjoyment, so you should do what sounds right to you. And I would argue that you should not be shelving down the highs like they do. And that I think you're going to find it generally sounds better with the bass shelved up, at least 3 or 4 dB. It's going to depend on the room and a lot of other things, and that's why like there is no hard and fast rules, but the X curve came about as a result of the natural shape of the response of these systems in very large auditoriums, which had very little to do with what would be right in smaller rooms. Smaller rooms need a different curve. There actually are adjustments to the X curve for smaller rooms, but for some odd reason, from what I can tell at least, the Dolby Atmos music mixing curve doesn't have that, which you would think it should, because I think the vast majority of the Dolby Atmos mixing studios are much smaller than the far field rooms that curve came out of. It is what it is. I mean, there's been a lot of people who are very knowledgeable who have disagreed with that practice and have argued to change it, but it hasn't changed, and there's not a lot we can do about it, which puts us in a weird position. Do we then just follow what they're doing even though it's wrong? Or do we do our own thing? Like I said, it's your system, so I think you should do your own thing. So I hope you found this video helpful. Please like these videos if you like them. If you don't like them, I'm sorry. Subscribe to my channel. Recommend my videos to your friends if you can. Tell them to subscribe. Appreciate that. Keep asking questions. Keep commenting. If you disagree with anything I said, say it. It's fine. We can have a discussion about it. Maybe it'll make for a good new video. You never know. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody.